And we are live. And I recognize this background behind Don Smith. I've seen that before. Where have I seen that before? How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Rich Barris. I sent him this. I found this picture and it was on. We were on together somewhere, and he was like, "Oh, you got to send me that." So I did. It's good background.
It definitely works for him, especially because it's got that punditry, quality. Like, expect there to be a room where you're going to walk next door. He's going to get angry, and Frank Luntz will be there. And
his worst nightmare. He wakes up in cold sweats with that dream. It's Frank.
Exactly. Now, I've seen you around. I've seen you on the show with Rich, People's Pundit, and it's like you're out there, I'm out there. We know all the same people. I don't really know you that well. And to confess with everybody, I did almost no preparation. So I was like, I just wanted to have a chat, talk to another host, because to me, being a host is different in a lot of ways than like Rich is a professional. Barnes is a lawyer. Viva is a lawyer. There's all these professionals. I'm kind of a hack who talks to people. So I'm sure that you're not a hack like I am, but you do talk to people and you're bringing that. But I understand you also run public relations.
I do. Yeah. So, I mean, I used to work in the executive field. I worked for BF Goodrich. So I used to run some of their companies, manage some of their industrial segment companies, and did that for a number of years and enjoyed it, but kind of got burnt out a little bit.
What is that exactly? If you don't mind explaining, what is that? Like executive what?
So I worked for BF Goodrich, and they had a industrial segment. So, we made like Garlock sealing technologies, Fairbanks Morse engines. So within their industrial sector, if they had businesses that were like struggling, I was big into lean manufacturing. So it was what's called a black belt.
God, Six Sigma. Oh,
yeah, all that stuff.
Show's over.
No. All that stuff. Yes. See, we're going to fight already, aren't we? So they would send me to businesses that were failing, that had a lot of waste and things like that, or that they assumed had a lot of waste. And it was my job to turn them around or tell them that we should get rid of this business. So, which I never did that. I figured everything can be fixed. I kind of always a eternal optimist, I guess. So anyway, so I did that for a number of years. And then I guess I was always political. So at one point I just said, I think this was the beginning of Barack Obama days. And I was concerned about the future of our country and thought, what, maybe I'll be a talk show host. And my wife's like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, you've never done that before. So yeah, go be a talk show host. So I did. And and here we are. So that was 13 years, I guess, something like that ago. And realized pretty quickly that you're not going to make a living off of being a talk show host unless you're going on Fox or, somebody's throwing a big contract at you. And even that was undesirable to me just because then they kind of control a little bit what you say. And so case in point, when I first started, I had like LegalZoom was a sponsor. I had Regis, had some others. And I would get these calls every Monday, right? They have their board meeting Monday morning and they'd be like, hey, could you not say this anymore? And hey, could you not say that anymore? And it was just like, oh God. So started a public relations business just because I had built up some contacts at that point. And so I've done public relations for people like Ben Shapiro, Deneen Borelli, Deneen and Tom, for people like Dan Bongino.
Non-controversial people too, like Ted Nugent.
Yep, exactly. So I've helped people promote their books, put together events, and just various other things, get them on news, help them become Fox News contributors, things like that. Kevin Jackson was one of my clients for a while. So that's a way that I can make a living, but still kind of be in the sphere or the realm of what I do without stepping out too far. And it keeps me out of trouble most of the time.
Okay, well, it's interesting. I want to parse that down because we rattled up, like 13 years in 2 minutes. I want to get deep because this is interesting. And I think a lot of people would find out. I'm going to go way back though. You were a submariner.
I was. Yeah. So
I hope you're not too big because I've been on a naval vessel and I'm 6'2", and it is an uncomfortable experience being on one. Just
Yeah.
the claustrophobia. Oh my God.
So yeah, so I joined the Navy. So this was back. I mean, obviously, I was a much younger man back then. So I joined the Navy, and the one thing I wasn't going to do was go on a submarine because it kind of scared the heck out of me. And I was like, wow, I'm not going underwater like that. So then I get in and I find out the extra training you get, the better food, the better pay, everything that goes along with being a submariner. So yeah, I volunteered to do that and made it through one of the things you go through that process, and there's like, of all the people that made it to submarine school out in Groton, Connecticut, I think maybe 2 out of 10 ever actually stepped foot onto a submarine. So that's quite a process to get people out. And I bring that up just because part of that process is claustrophobia. Are you claustrophobic? Can you physically maneuver around inside this tube? So ended up on a submarine and spent a little over 2 years underwater, submerged with no contact with the outside world. And so it's a different way of life. It's a really unique experience to go through. Coolest thing about it is it's the most amazing group of people that you can possibly work with. They're all the tops in their field, and they've all been through all this process of getting to a submarine that I went through. So you end up serving with the greatest, the best at everything that they do. And so that's kind of fun, because you don't get that anywhere else. It's not so segregated to where there's such a process to get there. So I really appreciate that as much as anything. But it's definitely an unusual lifestyle to go out for 3 months, pull the cork and go down, and that's it. You stay down and then you come back home and you just keep rotating that way. So yeah, I spent a little over 2 years submerged. So kind of a unique thing.
I bring that up just simply because I'm thinking that could be advantageous to what you are doing now, because I can imagine it's not only claustrophobia, but depending on who you are, how you're built, like I'm borderline antisocial. I mean, I'm not terribly, but I love my alone time.
Yep.
And
there's none of that.
Right. And you have to become a master at conflict resolution in a lot of ways, correct?
You do. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every day, that's your life. And you also have to, like you said, so if you're antisocial, that would be something that would probably prohibit you from ending up on a submarine, just because, I mean, they give you all these psychological evaluations and all these different various things to see how you interact with people. And there's no alone time. I mean, the only alone time you really get is when you do your laundry, once a week or whatever. And as long as there's nobody else in there doing theirs too. So very little isolationism, but you have to be able to compartmentalize issues too and say, okay, even though there's people always around you, I got to focus on this because this has to get done because we're pulling into port tomorrow, and all these different things, that problem solving things that you have to work through. When things happen, you have to be able to react very quickly to them. It's a submarine, and even the slightest problem can become a huge problem in just a matter of a couple minutes. So yeah, I learned a lot through that entire experience.
Okay, and I'm asking because I look at it now, and now there's representations out there, obviously, of a public image. Like I was just joking when I said non-controversial people like Ted Nugent. Ted Nugent is seen as just an insane wild man. But when I see interviews with him, he actually kind of comes off to me like he's a sweetheart. Like he's probably one of the mellowest people around.
Yep. And
would be the one who would split like part of his dinner. Oh, here, you want a piece? It just gives me that vibe. I don't know if I'm right or wrong. But I imagine you are going to deal with personalities, and don't name them, who might be a little bit more combative or stronger personalities. And that kind of background, even though it was only 4 years of your career, being in that pressure situation, has that proven invaluable in client relations and diplomacy and speaking with them?
Yeah. Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, okay, so I went from the submarine, then got out and went into the business field. So because of the service that I did in the submarine, I was able to get my degree in business management. So that's where it really kind of all came together, right? So I had been in this experience before with having to interact with people, problem solve with them, all these kind of things. And now it was kind of like I was responsible for bringing the group together and getting them on board with doing that at whatever company I happened to be at that time. So So I learned a lot through that. And then by the time I got into the talk show, yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to deal with either it's a Ted Nugent or, whoever else it may be. Everybody's got different personalities. And like you said, some people have really strong personalities. So sometimes you have to learn how to, kind of step back of your own self a little bit and give them a little bit more space than you would normally give to, the average person that you would interview. So yeah, definitely that has paid a lot of dividends for me and being able to talk to people. I try to, and I think from what I know about you, I see the same thing, is try to have conversations with people as opposed to an interview where I come in with a list of questions. And, so I love the name of your show, Unstructured, because kind of my interviews are really unstructured. At the beginning, I would do that. I would have a list, and I found myself being, because that's when you get to the point where you're like, okay, hey, no, I want to talk about this, and no, and you don't react to what people are saying and go with the flow and just have a conversation. So that's what I really try to do, is just have conversations with people. Wherever it leads, it leads. And very few interviews have I ever done where I've had an agenda, so to speak. Donald Trump was one of them. But other than that, most of the time, it's just a really unstructured situation, like you were talking about. And yes, Ted Nugent is an incredibly sweet guy. He's not anything like he appears to be in some of the interviews you see with him, but he's a great guy.
Yeah. And okay, like Donald Trump, you would have to prepare that. And I'm sure you'd have to send in the questions. There's negotiations going on and different things. Okay, well, or at least a time figure. Like, you've got a 15-minute hit or 10-minute hit or whatever it's going to be. It's going to be very, very disciplined. Like, I had Cheryl Atkinson on, and I was very dialed in to try to be right on with her. And other ones, I'm much looser. Almost everybody. But yeah, I can imagine that. So now, it's interesting you bring up the questions. I still draft up lists and lists of questions and then wind up not asking half of them or even a tenth of them. And it's a weird principle. And I'm always curious about process, and hopefully everybody's indulgent with me. But I do go into a show usually with an agenda. And that agenda is just to try to create a rapport of some kind. And so it's kind of like I try to find an angle that I can speak about that maybe is fresh, that you haven't heard. For example, with you, how many times have people asked you about your Submariner years and how it could influence your career?
Yeah, not too often.
So that's an example, just to try to, because now you're like, oh, well, this is different. I don't know what's coming next. And that's, I guess, my agenda, if that makes any sense.
It does. Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the things when I do interviews too, so it's like what you're talking about here. So if I interview somebody for the first time and it's an interesting person at an interesting time, there's something going on. And what I try to do is look at the interviews that were done with them. And especially like if it's about a book, right? So if it's about a book, I look at the questions that they get asked all the time, because you can find a pattern to it. So there's like these 5 questions get asked every single interview. So I don't ask any of those. I want to ask, like you, I want to ask different things that take it to a different place. And I find that people really appreciate that. So.
Well, that's awesome. And this is why I want to go deep into all this, though, because I want to parse you as a host, but then you're also a publicist. I guess that would be the term, right? So there's 2 different roles. So in one, you are the host, but in the other one, you're prepping your client for a host. And then you have different hosts that are going different ways. So that's why it's kind of an interesting thing. So let's go back to, you said that you determined, hey, I want to do a talk show. And I'm thinking that you started a podcast as your entree into it. Is that correct?
Okay. So actually, when I started, there was no blog talk. None of that stuff was really a thing. So there was this thing called, I think it was called Broadstream. So if I'm wrong, I apologize for that. But it was, so I would put together a pre-taped show, a 1-hour show, and then I would stream it live every Saturday at noon Eastern time. So it was all pre-put together on Friday. I'd finish it up Friday night. Any interviews I did would all be part of that. And then you just streamed it out there. And so it was, if people didn't listen to it live, there was no archives. There was no any of that stuff. So it was probably couple of years before I moved into Blog Talk, because then that started coming around and people were using it. So yeah, at that time it became a podcast. But this was before there was even a term for it, right? There was no such term at that time as podcast.
Was 2004 was podcasting. So I was trying to get, the timeline there. So if it, but I do know early years, there was like, I guess, competing things. Like podcasting didn't really come into prominence until 2008, 9, somewhere in there. And it started rolling. But I do know that, a lot of people were buying radio time and doing pre-recordings and then trying to get it self-syndicated and different things. So was it something like that you were doing?
At the beginning, it was just, I was just doing it. And at that time, I really didn't even care how many people were listening. It was just like a passion, something that I wanted to do. Like I said, I started the public relations things. So that was how I made a living. But
so you did it right away.
So I wasn't really that concerned. I had no desire to ever really syndicate or, which sounds strange. I mean, you think everybody who does this wants to be heard by as many people as humanly possible. And I guess I do in a way, but I just do what I do. And I figure people that listen to it, they'll either like it or they won't. And so I never really put a lot of own PR. I guess is the best way to say it. I never put a lot of PR into my own thing. My time was focused on other people and helping them build their brands and things like that.
Okay, and I guess that's interesting. So I didn't know that you were doing that right away. And thank you, Sergeant Hodel. Not quite on topic, but I do appreciate the super chat. And I may not be perfect about answering all the super chats because I definitely want to have the interview going. So, but thank you, anybody who's donating. I deeply, deeply appreciate that. Okay, so that's interesting that you had on, or that you were doing the public relations. So it's just interesting to me, period. Like, how do you go about this? I know you might have some business context or whatever, but it's hard to just say, let me put out a shingle and say, I do public relations. How do you go about that?
So I was interviewing people, and I was interviewing interesting people even from the beginning when I didn't have a huge, at the time there was not a lot of people listening, but I had the contacts to be able to I had been on Fox News and some other media outlets talking about like Second Amendment things and different issues like that. So had some contacts in that regard. So somebody would write a book and be like, I just sent them an email. Hey, I do public relations. You want any help with that book? And they'd be like, yeah, or I'd have them on my show. And at the time, all my interviews, most of them were, at that time at the very beginning, they were all pre-taped. So I had, 5-10 minutes, and I would usually talk with these guys, like Ben Shapiro, when he had Bullies coming out. It was like, we talked for probably 15 minutes before we started recording. And he was like, hey, would you help me out with this? And I'm like, sure, yeah. So a lot of it was just, so there was always a marriage between the show and the public relations side of it.
Okay, and it's cool too because you can use your show like I hate to say training ground, but you can use your show like training ground in a way. I mean, just to feel them out. It's a comfortable environment. They know you're not out there to get them, and that actually leads me into part of it. You are representing people who are traditionally seen as conservative or right wing most of the time. Now you could have a wider spread. I don't know, but all the big names you mentioned are all right wingers. It would be the way I'd put it. That is a challenge, I would think, in today's climate with, some would say so-called cancel culture. I think it's a very real thing. But when you're having to put clients out there, do you work with them any extra, or do you have any kind of help in helping them navigate what I literally would call landmines?
Well, I mean, the thing with public relations, one of the things that makes it as interesting to me as it is that everybody has like different goals, and they have. So the first thing you do when you get a client is, what is your goal? Do you want to become a Fox News contributor? Do you want to sell books? Do you want to, you got a movie you want to promote? What is your goal, and where do you want to go? Do you want to be on CNN? I've gotten people on CNN. I've gotten people on MSNBC. I've gotten people on very left-wing news outlets. So most people, though, there's a comfort zone there. And for me, I'll just come right out and say all my clients are conservative. If I don't believe in what they're doing, I don't want to work with them. So I've been fortunate enough to be able to do that throughout the years and work with just people that I'm like, yeah, oh, hey, I love this. I love what you're doing here with this. And I'd love to work with you on that. But I've had people come to me too that it's like, yeah, I just don't think this is a good fit. I'm not interested in what you do. I maybe don't believe your motivations or whatever the case may be. I've been fortunate enough to be able to kind of pick and choose who I work with. And that makes it a lot more enjoyable for me, I think, in the long run.
Interesting. Well, somebody wanted to ask you, so why not? How accessible, whatever you mean by accessible, and then how much are your services in general?
So, okay, so it depends on exactly what somebody wants. So I do a lot right now with politicians. So I do a lot of work as a communications director or whatever on with various politicians. The last election cycle, I worked on 6 different campaigns. So it depends on what it is. Standard services, the cheapest service, if you're like a first-time author, would be like $700 a month. If you're, a Ben Shapiro or something like that, it's $1,500 a month because there's a lot more work that goes into that because you're going to get booked on like multiple interviews and everybody wants to have Ben Shapiro on. So, so it all depends on what it is. And I also kind of take into account, like I said, if you're a first-time author, I realize you're coming from a different place than a Ben Shapiro or a Dan Bongino or somebody like that. So, yeah, it varies on that respect. When I do communications director for campaigns, it's $2,500 a month. Then that's obviously because that's a lot more work to work with politicians as well, especially ones that are running for their first time. That could be a real challenge. But like you said earlier, this is my training ground. So it's like, okay, come on, let's do some interviews together. And I'm going to ask you questions that I know these guys are going to ask you. And so that I think that helps them a lot. It puts them at ease because they know that I do this. And they can watch my show and watch me interview people. And so I think that, gives a comfort level to them as well.
Okay, that's cool. I love the mechanics going into it. You mentioned Ben Shapiro. I would think that especially now, being a publicist for a Ben Shapiro, you're more of a gatekeeper than you are really seeking opportunities. You're almost like a filter because you're right. Everybody wants them on, but you'd be like, hey, Tucker, Ruben, a short or whatever that were just automatic yeses. And then you would be starting to look around like, if I called, you'd be like, no, grow a little bit. Other people.
I would never do that to you.
I have to be very realistic. And that, that's part of it. There's a hierarchy within the industry, if you will. And in a weird way, by your representing, you kind of have found a spot in the hierarchy to give you a lot of flexibility and strength, I would say.
But let me say this, because I think this is important and this goes for anybody who's maybe doing a talk show host or doing a talk show or thinking about starting one or anything like this. One thing I learned early on, and this goes back to the military stuff, but more so even the business stuff, is you got to assume it. So never put yourself in that position I would have never interviewed Donald Trump if I felt myself unworthy of interviewing Donald Trump. So never put yourself in that position that, hey, I couldn't get this person. I went after big names. I mean, the first big name I had on my show was Chuck Woolery, game show host, and I probably had 50 people listening to me then. My next biggest guest a couple weeks later was Ted Nugent, and I had maybe a couple more hundred people listening then. So always assume that you're totally worthy of it, and never put yourself in a position of, hey, I'm just the little guy here, and so you probably don't want to come on my show. Never do that. Just go.
Well, I'm not going to present that way.
No, yeah, and that's not directed at you. I'm saying to anybody out there who's thinking about, hey, I'd like to do this, and how do I get people on? But so that puts you in that hierarchy though, because you start interacting with these people, and pretty soon they're like totally comfortable with you. So when I reach out to Ted Nugent now, I go through his assistant Linda, and it's just like it's like I'm getting anybody else on my show. We just had him on here last Monday on General Valley's show, and so I mean, just always go for it. Always consider yourself worthy. They came back. The Trump people came back, and they were like, okay, well, who are you? And I'm like, I'm Don Smith, man.
And what are your numbers?
And I want him on my show. And I'm like, well, yeah. So I mean, and you do get some of that. You get that what are your numbers and all those kind of things. But they didn't give me any of that. They didn't give me any. I didn't have to screen questions with them. I was really surprised by the openness that they had. But I think if you take it if you go into it with that approach, you're less likely to get that kind of stuff. Like, well, can we see what you'd ask him? And because then they're kind of checking you, feeling you out a little bit more than maybe they should. I don't know. Just my view.
Right. Well, and the more you do it, I mean, obviously the name drop factor.
Sure.
I mean, it's very, very important, and it does help.
Mm-hmm.
And I would agree with you completely on the whole thing of nobody is too small, nobody's too big. But I'm pointing out a realism factor. Like, it takes more work. Now, if you can get to the person, you can prove that you're a quality enough show.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, miracles happen. It can happen. But it can be very, very, very challenging. Like, I've had some I reach out to, and you could probably confirm this. If they're in the news and trending right now, something very hot, you might want to wait a couple months, because they're so deluged with phone calls 24/7 that you can't get through. Like, let's say a good one would be Mumford & Sons, Winston Marshall. He got fired or quit, right? Well, I reached out to him, of course, but then I realized it, and I heard through the grapevine too. The guy got so much coming in that he couldn't even answer the emails. So there are those factors.
But see, I take the tact that that's the best time, because they're a little off balance already. And it's like, so yeah, you slide one in there and they're like, okay, we'll do that. Yeah. So I kind of take that tact. It's like, because that's what I want them. I don't want them a couple months later after they've been through 200 interviews and everybody's heard everything that they have to say. And I want them now. I want them when they're hot. And if the next week I'll go on to somebody else who's hot now. Okay, boom, boom. So I guess I've always just been kind of really aggressive on the booking side of it. But for me, that's almost the most fun part of it. I love doing the talking, and I love I like doing the show. But it's I guess like a big game hunter would be like, that would be their thrill, going out and getting whatever big game. I don't do that, but God bless whoever does. But for me, it's going after the big one. I want the one that people tell me there's no way you can get that person on your show. Hold my beer. Okay. That's what I like doing.
So when's James Woods going on your show?
Oh, hey, there's a challenge. All right, we'll get James Woods.
I just thought about it. I'm like, no, I think he's a tougher one to get. So that would be fun to
probably is
throw out there for you.
Yep, probably is.
No, I love this. And I think it's interesting. We're seeing the different personality types. Like, my focus is so much this moment. This is all I care about. Booking is a pain in the ass. Stuff is all I care about is learning about people and being in this moment and interacting with the audience and things. So that's a very interesting combination.
Yep.
Now, let me see. Was Ted Nugent your first client then? Because you mentioned you had it early on.
The first client I ever had. So when I started my business, I was working with some different groups of Tea Party groups at the time. And so there was an attorney who was a former member of part of the DOJ who lived in Washington, D.C., who was putting on an event called the DC March for Jobs. So this was about legal immigration. And so this was one of my exceptions. This was a group that was actually mostly progressive, but the lady who ran the organization, Leah Durant, I'll say her name, great lady. She was a conservative, but she was the head of the organization along with another doctor guy. He was a liberal, or he is progressive. So they wanted to put on this event, and it was actually turned out to be amazing. So it just happened that at the same time that I was putting this business together, and she was like, "Hey, would you put this together for us?" And I was like, "Sure." So we ended up having, Jeff Sessions, Alan West, Ted Cruz. It was nice. It was an all-day thing. Breitbart live streamed it. So
I was going to say, did you get an opportunity to meet or deal with Andrew Breitbart?
No, not with Andrew Breitbart. But I did get to deal with Steve Bannon, Ben Shapiro. So that was part of where I really got associated with those guys in a tighter way, in a closer way. But it was an amazing. No, he wasn't there. He wasn't there. But what was really cool, Eric, about this event was out of all the events that I've been involved with, putting together freedom tours and all these kind of things, this was 2/3 of this crowd were Black Americans. They were progressives, but they were in agreement with the Tea Party on the issue of immigration. So this is about getting immigration reform, saving jobs, and that whole thing. But it was just this amazing event of people just coming together. And even though we were from different sides of the political aisle on this issue, we were completely united. Everybody had a great time, got along perfectly. And it was just a really cool event to be a part of. So that was my first big thing. That was my first big client. Did some work with Chuck Woolery, did some work with Ted Nugent, his wife Shemaine. I've actually done more PR work for Shemaine than I did for Ted. But yeah, it just kind of came that way. I met a lot of people at that DC March for Jobs. So I did stuff with Mo Brooks, and he was part of that, and some other great people that were there as well.
Well, that's awesome. Now, silly question, probably, but is there any specific training for a quote publicist?
Not really. What it really comes down to be a good, in my view, to be a good publicist is your connections. Number one, you got to have the connection. You got to know who to talk to. There's a lot of people that throw stuff at Fox News but they're throwing them at the wrong people. So you got to know who to get to, who to talk to, but then you also have to know how to talk to them too. So I think it's all that stuff combined. So I don't know that you really can train just because of the aspect of how important the connections are, because you're not going to go, hey, here, I'm going to give you this training on how to talk to these people. I'll write all the emails up for you. And here's my whole list of contacts that I've spent the last 10 years putting together. So I think that's the real challenge, is knowing who to talk to. And once you know who is how, you've got to give them something that piques their interest, right? Because if I'm sure you get pitches, right? So people send you pitches, and it's like, okay, you've got to grab their attention. Because if you're like me, you get a lot of them. So you're just like, yeah. So it's got to be something that grabs your attention and makes you interested. Why would I want to have your client on my show? So if you can answer that in a heading, you're miles ahead of everyone else.
Oh yeah, and we. Oh, I have some prime ones, but yes,
Yep.
Hey, insert name here. Or there's like the whole automated, which is just pure buckshot stuff.
Yes.
But then there's just a lot of people who are like, oh, I love your show. And it's like, you've never seen it.
Right.
You have no idea what I do.
Right.
Or it's like, well, I want to charge your life with the entrepreneur. And I'm like, I don't do entrepreneurs. Okay. But I don't even bother anymore. And it's like, if I get one more marketing person, I'm going to puke. But yeah, that's got to be an issue. And I'm wondering if while I make fun of the Six Sigma aspect of it, I'm wondering if your process-driven mind helps you reverse engineer the process of getting people in the door.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. Absolutely. It's all numbers. It's all, like I said, how do you break it down to get their attention? Like you said, you're not going to sit there and read the, hey, fill in the blank. Yeah, that's done. You're gone. So I think another part of it though is this. So yes, the statistical processing of things, the eliminating waste. How many pitches have you gotten? And they're like, they're like never ending. It's like, there's no way I would sit number one, I don't have time to read all this. Number two, I'm not interested enough to read all this. I read your, hey, fill in the blank, and I'm done. So one of the aspects of it too is eliminating waste, making it I always make sure it's less than one page on a Word document for the full pitch. In fact, I try to make it a half a page if I can, depending on what the topic is. But I do something different it's personal. So there's never a, hey, fill in the blank. It's always, hey, Joe, and there's some tie back to something. And there's a personal connection. Every single pitch that I do is not an automated thing. It's all personal. It's to this individual. And I know Joe, so I know what he wants. I know what his thought process is. And I think that probably significantly increases the success rate of getting people on.
That's interesting. And that's something that I've done actually, is I type out every pitch 100%, even though often I'm saying the same thing I've said dozens of times. I'm still typing it, thinking about them and shaping it. And I don't know if it's true or not, but I feel like intuitively somebody reading it will know that, no, I didn't just, spew it out and copy and paste and send out my 5 that day. I literally do think about who the guest will be if I'm reaching out to them. And a lot of times I'm gambling because I'm like, I've had such and such on who you've been a major critic of. And do you want to come on and discuss this? Why that behavioral analysis does not work, but what would you recommend or whatever? So it's interesting. And I'm glad to hear that, as a publicist, you're doing that. I don't think everybody does. I know that there's, in my world, a lot of forums, a lot of things, and it would be very nice, but very cool. And your voice is very loved, by the way. Getting a lot of good feedback in here.
Well, thank you. I've always been told I have a voice for radio, but not a face for video, I think. I don't know. I do the best I can. What are you going to do?
I've got a face for radio, that's for sure. But what are you going to do?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let me see. Going into it, I just find this fascinating. So you build this up, and now without giving every trade secret, how do you establish the relationships with, let's say, the networks? Because you're placing people. So you have your show, your host, and you're an endpoint, and I imagine you pitch for guests there as well. Mm-hmm. But how do you go about finding the right person within the network?
Okay. Whatever. Well, I mean, there's certainly there's a process there. So I guess if you want to take the big one would be, either Newsmax or Fox News, obviously would be the big fish in the sea. So when you go to Fox News, you've got to know what are the people's roles in that, in that organization. What kind of pull do they have? Sometimes you find that out by, if I want to have somebody on Fox and Friends, okay, I'll go to Pete Hegseth and I'll say, hey, Pete, what do you think about this? Who would be this? There's been times where I've asked, who would be the best person to get this to? Who would be the most reactive to this? Most of the time, I know just because of past experience. Some of the people who are now associate producers, executive producers of some of these shows, they were bookers when I started doing this. So they were very young, fresh out of school. In some of these cases, they're long-term relationships. On other shows, there's been a big, overturning of people, and it's always new people. And so those are the times when I would reach out and say, hey, who would you, because I've had Pete on my show a number of times. I've had, whatever the show is. I've had Laura Ingraham on the show. All these people I've either had on my show, I've been on their show. So there's some kind of relationship where I can reach out to them and get some advice if I need it. But a lot of them are just long-term relationships. And you just know that this is the person you go to. This guy is a big Second Amendment person. This gal is a big on this issue. And so reach out to the right people and pitch them for the issues that they want. Because you got to understand, when these guys go into a room, so Fox and Friends, for example, so they'll go into a room, let's say the weekend. So Fox and Friends weekend show, they're going into a room Thursday and they're sitting down and they're going, okay, so here's all the stuff we've got. And these guys are competing because they all want their stuff on, whether it's a booker, an associate producer. The executive producer makes the final decision. So who has the sway with that executive producer can be one of the angles as well. But they're sitting here going through all this stuff going, okay, yep, we're going to do this one, and this one. So my job is to help them get the story on, because that's going to help my client get my client on. So I think if you approach it that way, it's increases your success rate significantly.
That's interesting. Do you ever just approach them and just say, what are you guys looking for?
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. There's been times where I've reached out and said, okay, look, I've got this issue is going on right now, and I know you guys are going to talk about it. I have this client who can come at it from this angle, and I've got this client who can come at it from this angle. Or do either of those, pique your curiosity? And then like, yeah, could we get, yeah, sure. Boom. And then I'll put the pitch together. So, yep, it's being flexible, and it's doing whatever it takes to get your clients on, and to give Fox and Friends a good segment. Because if I get
the most important thing,
if I get a client on about something and that's not the right client, and I know it's not the right client, they're going to know it too after that segment's done, and they're going to be like, don't ever get one of his guys on again, And so I never put myself in that position either. So,
okay, well, now we got to ask, because without naming names, give me a war story.
By war story, what do you want? What are you looking for?
Well, first off, do you know the difference between a war story and a fairy tale?
What?
A fairy tale starts off with "Once upon a time," and a war story starts off with "There I was."
There I was.
So, I know you have had to send the wrong client to the wrong show, or had something where there was a relationship that you didn't know about with some producer between a client or something, and you sent it. So there's got to be one there.
Yeah, I guess the best one or the worst one, however you want to look at it. There I was, and it was a political candidate who was running for the first time. Done a lot of work with him, and worked on getting the communication skills right and being ready to go on. So this was a not ready for primetime player, I guess is the best way to say it, and went on to do the segment and stumbled and stuttered and misspoke on a couple different things and got off topic and went way off topic onto something else. And they were kind of like, okay, we're here to talk about. And so that was probably the worst one that I've ever had. That was 4 years ago, something like that, 5 years ago. So that was a send the apology email. Hey, I'm really sorry. We really worked on this and did great in rehearsal, but I'm sorry. So yeah.
What do you do after? Do you fire the client, or do you just keep working with them?
You keep working with them. You keep working with them, and you say, okay, what you do is you use that segment and you say, okay, we're going to spend about 2 hours, and this was a 3 minute, 4 minute segment, and we're going to go over this thing for about 3 hours until you understand, and we're going to keep rehearsing, and we're going to keep getting better and improving. I will say, I ended up getting that client back on, and he did a great job. So about 4 months later, something like that, got him back on, and he did a great job. So all ended well.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. And I was going to say, you can always use it as a cudgel in 2 years and, keep the humility there. Like, wait. Can I share something with you? Here, I sent you a text with a little video you might want to check out.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That was one of those ones that I just wanted to forget. So we spent the 3 hours, we went over it, and then it was like, well, we'll never speak of this again. Ever. Until now. He's probably watching right now. Hey, Al. Sorry.
Oh, my God. Oh, man. Okay. Do you ever and this stuff I don't even know, but I'm like, I'm just thinking it would be interesting in your position. Do you ever reach out to Fox and say, well, what if I could get, and you just like kind of just throw out a list of names, and maybe you don't have them as clients.
No.
And okay, I didn't know if you've ever done that kind of thing, and then reached out to the potential client and say, hey, have you ever thought about going on here or whatever? Or you'd be great for Fox because you're a Second Amendment gun instructor or whatever, and their segments.
And there are a lot of people that do that. There are a lot of people that assume. So what I told you before, just assume and go get the clients and all that stuff. There's people that take that to an extreme. And so they'll put on their website, they'll say, oh, I represent all these people. And it's like, no, you don't. So I think that reputation is the most important part of this whole thing when it comes to PR, when it comes to pitching people, when it comes to all that stuff. And that includes with the clients themselves. So to me, that's just flat out misrepresentation. And I'm not that desperate to always get somebody on. I want to get somebody on because they're my client and that's what they want to do. And so, yeah, I don't go around it. That's kind of, to me, it's a little bit like an ambulance chaser. You know what I mean? I don't know. That's kind of how I look at it. So no, I've never done that. Never will. Yeah, I like to have a more straightforward, honest relationship with these guys. They know if I'm pitching this person, because this is another thing that can happen. You go and you throw a bunch of names at them. Well, they may know somebody who actually knows their publicist.
True.
And then they're going to them, and then it makes you look bad because they're like, well, why was he pitching this person when he doesn't even represent that person? So I think relationships are really important. And I mentioned that in the business aspect and the submarine aspect. And I think it's important, is maybe even more important in this side of it, because there's got to be a level of trust there.
Well, good. And on the flip side of it too, do you ever package people? in terms of like you have somebody who has a bit more gravitas and name, and then you have new upcomer, like the first time author,
Yep.
and the other person who is much more well known.
Yep.
Both super quality. Just one isn't as well known as the other. Do you ever
Absolutely
package them together or do deals like that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a great question. It's really important to be able to do that because, like you said, they might be both equally qualified to do a great interview. But the one's a new author and nobody's ever heard of this person before. And they used to run a business here and somewhere in Ohio or, whatever. But nobody's heard of them. They haven't been on TV anywhere before. So yeah, that is a key. That's a key strategy. The most important part of that is making sure, like you said, both of them are capable and ready to do that. And if they are, there's been multiple times that I've done that. Okay, hey, I'll get Victoria Jackson on your show, but would you do me a favor? And I'd really like to have this author on because I know this issue's coming up. And so yeah, I've done that before, and most of the time they're very receptive to doing that.
Oh, good. And ironically, now has it been the case? And I'm assuming this is true that sometimes that newbie client is really a diamond that nobody knows about, and they're like, "Oh my God, that person was amazing."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's happened to me quite often. The very first time I did anything with Dan Bongino, he wasn't that well known. Did some stuff way back in the day with Charlie Kirk. He had I think one appearance on Fox News at the time. So there's been a lot of people that it's like bam. And then all of a sudden they're who they are. I mean, look at Dan. That's amazing. Great for him and well-deserved. So yeah, I've had that happen a number of times. So I guess in that respect, I've always kind of been fortunate because that's one of those things you kind of, it's not because of my super duper skills of being able to find these people. They found me and I was like, yeah, I think this person would work. And so I've just been really fortunate in that aspect.
Well, is that a product of your being I'm going to say a lane? You have a niche, you have a lane. Mm-hmm. You said everybody's conservative, even though I haven't gotten into the whole populist versus conservative and whatever you think about that, but people are generally thinking in the same manner. So I'm guessing it helps recruitment if they're like, well, Ted Nugent thinks this way. Ted Nugent works with him. I think like Ted. Oh, such and such is there too. Oh, and they're such. Oh, they're too. Okay. So it gets kind of a little bit more comfortable for them in the sense that, okay, well, it's kind of like a bunch of like-minded people. It's sort of a party I want to hang out.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what I said earlier about there's always been a marriage between the show and the public relations. So if somebody's checking me out, what I've found typically is if somebody's checking me out and considering reaching out to me about working on the Publicist side of things, they're going to check the show out and they're going to go, well, let me find out who this guy is. And then they see the guests and they see all that stuff and they go, okay, obviously this guy knows somebody. So yeah, there's always been that marriage. And I think what the show has always given me on the PR side of things is just, at least a slight amount of respect or credibility, I guess is a better word. It's like, okay, yeah, well, this guy obviously, he must know somebody. So I guess I've always kind of had that built in just because of that marriage of the show and the PR.
Well, does that help you with bookers and hosts too, though? Because you're like, you can swap war stories with them and be like, oh God, yeah. And they know that as a rule, you run a show. So you have pet peeves that are probably going to be pretty similar. And you understand, baseline things of, okay, are they showing up? Do they have headphones? Do they have a mic or whatever? Because I know a lot of it's in person or whatever. Right. But there are certain standards and SOPs, I guess.
Exactly.
Which, by the way, fits right in with being on a submarine and Six Sigma, that you have the A to the B to the C, and this is what you do to go here.
Right. Well, yeah, because with my show, and that's a great point too, because with the show, I'm a one-man band, so I produce it, I book it, I do everything that's involved in creating a show. So even if it was just blog talk and creating a blog talk show, it's a little bit better, I think, now with what we're doing with like all the video stuff. But even when it's a blog talk thing, there's still a production quality that goes into that. So they know I've been on both sides of it. I do all these things for my show, and it's some of the same things that they're doing for their show. And so, yeah, we interact, we get to exchange stories and build those relationships, but they know it's coming from a place of, I understand what they need to put on a successful segment.
Okay, now I'm curious too. You mentioned Dan Bongino, so you might have actually answered that ahead of time. Was he a quote star that you discovered, or came to you, or have what other clients stand out in your mind? Like you knew them way early and had no idea. Like, did you know that Ben Shapiro was going to be Ben Shapiro? That's a good example.
I guess the answer would be I knew there was something about him. I mean, and I say that the way he speaks, the way he's just a really intelligent guy, and he can say things. He says things that it just makes sense to people that maybe 100 other people can say the same thing and it doesn't. So I saw special quality in him. Did I think he was going to be a big star? Not really. I figured it was going to, he was going to do his. He was at Breitbart. Just started at Breitbart, then he became the editor at large. So I knew he was moving up there. I knew he was a good writer, so I knew his books were going to be good. But to say that I knew he was going to be, what he has become today, not really. Same with Dan. My early stuff with Dan was like speaking engagements. So like somebody needed, hey, we need another guy for a speaking engagement, and I don't know if I should say this or not. I will. You should never say things after you say, I don't know if I should say this or not, but I will anyway. So, he wasn't the top tier guy. So he wasn't going to be the keynote of anything or anything like that, but he was a good speaker, and he had a great message, and he had a great background. And so he fit the bill. He had everything, but wasn't that well known at the time. So, so you don't always know exactly where everybody's going to end up, but sometimes that there's something special about this guy. I knew there was something special about Charlie Kirk. There was no Turning Point USA. There was no any of that stuff. He'd been on Fox once, and I think I had him on my show like a week later. And but just talking with him and doing the interview with me, he's a pretty young guy then too, and it was just like, yeah, this guy's going to do some big things. So yeah, I guess you kind of do know.
Interesting. Well, I guess if they hold your interest, that right there is kind of a statement. Like if you're going, well, this cat's really interesting, I want to hang out with him more. That maybe is the first line of proof in of itself. Yeah.
I think, and again, I think that's that whole thing of coming from the other side of it as well. So if I find them interesting enough to have them on the show, then I interview them on the show and go, wow, that was really, I'd like to have them back again. I assume that the people listening that were listening to the show, listening to the interview, I figure they probably feel the same way, that, I'd like to hear more from that person. And so I guess I kind of go on that gut instinct a little bit.
What was the most surprising thing you found out about any of your clients?
I guess I'm not sure, like surprising, like
it could be positive, it could be negative, it could be, anything. Just like we build impressions of people. And I took Ted Nugent earlier just because it's easy. There's this projected, dare I say, caricature about the guy that I don't think was accurate personally, but we still project on people, and we look at them and we think certain things about them. Have you had any of those clients where you're thinking one thing about them and then you meet them and then it's like, oh, wow, no, they're not that way at all. And it's not necessarily bad or good, just very, very different.
Yeah. And I would say not so much from a client perspective, because with a client, there's a lot of stuff that goes into the first thing I do with any client I get is I sit down and what are your goals? Tell me because I don't want to pre-decide what they want. Well, they just want to be on Fox News, or maybe they don't. Maybe they want this. Maybe they want to be on CNN. I don't know. So I never try to predisposition what that client wants. So there's always like it's an interview. It's like, okay, so if you could do anything you wanted right now, where do you see yourself? It's all those kind of questions, and you work through those things. So to be surprised by a client, that would mean I didn't do a good enough job of the vetting process. And I expect they're vetting me too. I mean, that's a two-way street. But in the conservative realm, in the conservative world, yeah, there's been a lot of people that have surprised me both ways. People that I expected were going to be, wow, this guy looks so nice, I can't wait to meet him. And then you meet him and you go, okay. But I've had the other side of it too, where it seems like, wow, this would be a really intimidating guy. And then you meet him. Donald Trump. The first time I met Donald Trump, I was like, ooh, ooh, okay. Because he just comes across like he's going to come in and just, kick chairs over in the room and he's going to just take charge. And so he really surprised me. But there's been a lot of people that have surprised me both ways. Two people that politicians that I've met that are just blew me away was Colonel Allen West and former Governor Scott Walker. Just the most genuine, incredible people. Not that I didn't think they were going into it, but they overperformed in my book as far as what I expected of them. But I've met the other side of it too. Like I said, I've met people that I couldn't wait to meet. I really like this guy. I watch his program on TV.
I think I know one now that I'm talking about it. And I think that you embarrassed may have slipped talking about it one time. Individual who is a host on Fox News that has a CIA pin that he wears.
So I was going to be on Sean Hannity's show one time.
I didn't even say the name.
I'll say it. And that's the thing. I've never been afraid to, if it happened. So it is what it is. And I've got nothing to be embarrassed about or ashamed about. I didn't do anything wrong. So I was going to be on his show because I had this video out. So when I first started doing the show, I told you about how I'd pre-record the show and I'd pump it out there. Well, I was also doing YouTube videos, which I was getting more interaction from my YouTube videos. And my first viral video, I guess I had 1.5 million views on it. And that brought a ton of people into the show and was also kind of like some credibility for me to go after some of the bigger name people because I could share that video instead of sharing. Yeah. There was no archive to the show. There was no way to check the numbers of the show back then, but that brought a lot of people into the show. Oh, yeah. So one of the people who saw it was, I don't know if it was Lauren, his producer, or if it was him himself. I don't know. So they wanted to have me come on and talk about this video. So I'm like, sure. Yeah, no problem. So bunch of emails back and forth. There was supposed to be a panel later that day, and it didn't happen. So whatever, we got bumped because of a breaking news story, whatever it was. So I get an email after the show's over. So I'm like sitting there waiting for the phone to ring, right? And I'm like, but no phone ring. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. So the next day, or actually later after the show ended, about an hour after the show ended, I got an email saying, hey, really sorry about that. We had all the breaking news, and could you come on tomorrow? And I'm like, sure, absolutely. So the next morning, right away, first thing in the morning, I'm getting these emails that say, okay, so when you come on, we don't want you to pitch anything. And I'm like, I'm not pitching anything. You want me on to talk about my video? And okay, so then I get another one, and it's like, okay, don't say anything about your radio show. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of weird. They're like, well, we're really concerned about free advertising. And it's like, they asked me to be on the show. I didn't call up Hannity. I didn't pitch him. I didn't say, hey, I'd be the greatest guest in the world. And anyway, so this went on, and then it started becoming phone calls. So now I'm on the phone with his producer, and it's Sean's really, and everything, they were all started out with Sean's really concerned that you're going to talk about your YouTube channel, that you're going to talk about your show, that you're going to.
And you're like, what if I did?
well, it's like, why are you having me on then? Who am I? Who am I supposed? You want me to come on in disguise? Or so finally, I asked the question. I said, so let me get this straight. I'm just Don from Jacksonville, and she goes, yeah, basically. I'm like, look, you guys reached out to me. You asked me to come on your show. I'd have been more than happy to do it. I know it's good publicity for me, and now you're telling me I'm Don from Jacksonville. Yeah, no thanks. I got other things I can work on. So I didn't go on the show. So a couple months later, we're at the RNC. So at the RNC, never met Sean in person. So we're there, and somebody that was with us says, somebody's staring at you. And I look over, and it's Sean, and he's all glaring at me like I pooped on his Pop-Tart or something. And I'm just like, what's the problem here? So anyway, I didn't say anything. I just, turned away. But then I had guests coming up on my show. So it started with Herman Cain. So I was going to have Herman Cain. He had his book out at the time, and he was excited about coming on because I was going to give him a half an hour instead of his 2-3 minutes.
Which is rare.
Yeah. And he wants to get into his book. He wants to talk about his book and sell his book. And so they were really excited. He's with Sean, and long story short, the phone doesn't ring, right? So I talked to his publicist, He's going on. He's got to do a last hit with Sean, and then he's going to go back to his room so that he can do this thing in privacy. Half an hour interview. He's all excited about it. Thank you so much. Blah, blah, blah. No phone call. So I start calling her. She's not answering. So I start emails. Boom, boom, boom. Finally, she comes back and she says, I'm sorry. He can't do it. And I'm like, Sean. She goes, yes. And I'm like, oh, okay. So then I was going to have, try to make it short. So then I was going to have Larry the cable guy. I'm going to have Larry the cable guy on. I put a thing out on Facebook. Hey, you're going to have Larry the cable guy on.
Yeah.
15, 20 minutes later, I don't know. I got the TV on in the background and I hear exclusively tonight on Sean Hannity, it's Larry the cable guy. And about 5 minutes later, I get an email. Sorry, Larry can't do it. And I'm like, so I go back to his publicist. I'm like, okay, what's going on here? Is this Sean? Yes. So then it was, let's see, Wayne LaPierre was the next day. Same thing, exclusively on Hannity tonight. So my friends are telling me, they're like, quit posting this stuff on here. I said, no, I'm going to get somebody who doesn't give a crap about if Sean Hannity tells them they can't be on their show or not. And that was the first time I had Ted Nugent on my show.
Oh, really? That's awesome.
So I post Ted Nugent's on my show, and 10 minutes later, there was no exclusively on Sean Hannity, because I don't think Ted would play that. I don't think so.
He's pretty old fashioned.
But it was also childish, because like, I'm just a podcast guy. This guy's got millions of people watching him on Fox News.
He's punching down a little bit.
Big time. Big time.
God. Well, that actually leads into another question, because it reminded me of all these stories, and I'm not, I don't hang out in Fox in the hallways. I don't know any of it, but that he and O'Reilly had a war over guests. Now, if you're a publicist and you're trying to book people, how are you dancing through this situation, especially if Sean doesn't like you anyway?
No, okay. So it wasn't just, you're absolutely right. The biggest battle there was Sean versus Bill O'Reilly. And they would fight. Oh my goodness. So I would get through, let's say I'm going to have somebody on Bill O'Reilly. So I'm going to have somebody on Bill O'Reilly, and they would come back and they'd say, is this exclusive? Do you want it to be exclusive? Does it have to be exclusive? My preference is not, because exclusive means they can't go on anything else. And that's ridiculous, because it just is. I don't like that whole game. I think that's wrong. I think if it's a good conservative voice, I like conservative voices. If it's a good conservative voice, they should go on everywhere. I mean, if they've got a good message to put out, they should at least have the right to go on everywhere. So it was Greta Van Susteren was really bad about that. They all are. I shouldn't even go through names, because they all are. They all want exclusivity, and it's a war. It's a war. So they're like, okay, well, Sean will have him on, and if you can, and that's where you get the packaging offers too. So you cancel Bill and give me that guest, and then I'll take another one of your guests. And then you get Bill's people coming back. And for me, once I book you on that show, that's it. And it's
okay. I was going to say, how would you navigate that? Because that would be, in my mind, I would feel lower than dirt. Like, if I cancel somebody, I'm no longer professional.
Right.
Unless I'm sick, like if somebody gets sick or whatever, that's fine. But to cancel for somebody else, to me, is lower than anything.
It is. Yeah. And it's okay. So ultimately it's up to the client. You got to say, okay, look, so here's the deal. They want to, and so it's up to the client. If the client says, well, I'd rather be on, then that's a bad situation. I don't think I ever actually had it go that way. I think every client I ever had just went, nope, we're already booked on O'Reilly. That's where we're going to be. So yeah, I don't recall any situations where that ever happened, where I had to go back and say, no, they're going to be on Hannity. Because once you do that too, for me, then I'm toast, right? Then they're going to be mad. They're going to hold a grudge, and they're going to be like, yeah. So, but I hate that aspect of it. I think that's terrible. And I don't think you should try to restrict people from going on other shows. That's just ridiculous. But I've had a lot of times though, where I've had clients too, where it's gone the other way. So I've had a client who had a book out, and they end up being on 5 different shows on Fox. So some of them are really cool about that, and others aren't.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that, because I want to get on the flip side. Like, is there a host out there or a show out there where there are sweethearts?
I always really liked working with Fox and Friends. Fox and Friends is really cool. Uh, I actually Megan Kelly her staff was really good to work with when she had her show on Fox. I mean, I guess those were the best. Bill O'Reilly's executive producer was like a really cool guy, and I had a really good connection with him. So he was good to work with, and I could go back to him and say, "Come on, man, we're not gonna play this game of the exclusive thing." And he's like, "Well, Bill said." So he'd be pretty open and honest about it. Well, Bill said, and so I had that happen with Victoria Jackson one time, and it was like, "Come on." So we ended up having her on a couple different shows, but Fox and Friends I always found to be the most pleasant to work with, and they work with you, and they're like, well, okay, hey, what about this? Could we go into this area? And so there was a lot more interaction with their team, but it wasn't the show, it's the team. It's the team that they had working for them at the time.
Okay, and that leads to another question, and I'm running over, so I apologize. What about now? Because O'Reilly essentially got fired or termed, and then Megan quit to go to NBC. Are you still working and saying, okay, well, I'm getting him on the O'Reilly podcast? I don't listen to it, so I don't know if he does guests, but I'm just asking if.
Yeah, I don't either.
Okay, I didn't know if you sent people to him for radio or podcasting or anyone else. So are you pretty much dialed into like CNN and Fox and the networks, or?
Oh no, I do a lot of stuff with radio and podcasts and all that kind of stuff. But it's always as part of that initial vetting process. Like I said, what are your goals? What do you want to be on? We kind of identify for each client. Here's who I'd really like to be. Maybe the client listens to Lars Larson and just loves Lars Larson, and that's always been one of their goals to get on that show. So we make up actual lists, targeted lists. So I don't do the mass sending out of pitching people. I'm pitching people to specific places that they want to be on, whether it's TV, radio, podcast, whatever the case may be. So it's very targeted what we do.
Oh, cool. Now, last question then. How did you meet and get to know Rich Barris?
So Rich and we go way back to the beginning of this thing. So back to the beginning of our journeys. So I was doing my show. We started writing for a publication called the Brenner Brief. So it was Sarah Marie Brenner. It became fairly popular. We had some good writers there. Back in the day, we had L. Todd Wood, we had Bradley Dean. And so a lot of us were kind of in our infancy stage of all this stuff, including Rich. And Rich was the editor. So I had a challenging relationship with Sarah, and Rich was he was the one who would go, this is a really good article, we really need to. So anyway, so we kind of bonded early on in the process, and just formed a friendship. And so we've gone through this whole journey. This was long before he was polling or a lot of the things that he does now that he's amazing at. I'm so proud of everything he's accomplished and what he's been able to do. So Laura, Rich, Brenda, myself, my wife, we've known each other going way back on this whole thing. So yeah, that's how we all came together, and here we are now, and we're at different phases of the career thing, and but it's been cool to make this journey with those guys too.
Yeah, it's awesome when you can have long-term relationships. So now people can find out more. Your show, DonSmithShow.com, and then if they want to reach out, maybe there's somebody in the audience who's looking for a publicist, ACSPublicRelations.com.
That's it.
Well, awesome. Well, Don, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Eric. I've been looking forward to coming on your show for a while now. So this is cool. You got to come on mine now. So and then I
not on Thursdays though. There's a little conflict on that.
No worries. Right. So yeah, I look forward to that, and I appreciate you having me on. And this was fun. Awesome. I like unstructured. I like just like I said, I like to have a conversation, and that's what we did. So very cool.
Definitely.